In 2013, Chicago realized the promise of smart cities with CTOS, a citywide operating system merging big data with surveillance, security, and transit programs. With a few hundred lines of code, hackers were able to hijack its central servers and cripple the entire grid. Many believed the attack would be a killing blow for smart city development. They were wrong. Coordinated from the heart of Silicon Valley, CTOS 2.0 has been implemented across the United States, ushering in the Internet of Things. 6.4 billion connected devices now serve as collection points, mapping and recording our daily routines, making a more secure and more invasive system. But who else is listening? Big Brother no longer works alone. Thousands of little brothers monitor and aggregate your every move, building a complete digital profile of you to be bought, sold, or stolen in an instant. Toys study your children, reporting their play habits back to marketers. Appliances, consoles, and home security systems give corporations a window into your private life. Control of your vehicle and mobile device can now be breached remotely by anyone at any time. You may think that you are immune or underestimate the risk, but your digital shadow is already compromised. Insurance companies use algorithms to monitor your life habits and limit or deny coverage. Health providers determine if your cancer is worth treating. Search results and news feeds are skewed to bias mood and influence your vote, engineering social uprisings on a massive scale. You are now less valuable than the data you produce. This is the new reality. Going dark is no longer an option. With threats to personal freedom rising, many are stepping forward. Whistleblowers, activists, and hackers have drawn their battle lines, putting the establishment on watch. But are they threats themselves, or have they become freedom's last line of defense? Freedom's last line of defense.
That sounds quite scary, right? How far are we from the truth, though, really? Because that's pretty close to what we can do now. And so I think we ought to ask the question, can our software ever be unhackable? But before that, who am I? Well, I'm Tony G. You very kindly introduced me. I did some previous work at Friends Provident, and I primarily speak on security awareness and IoT hacking. And Pentest Partners, I'm sure you've heard of us. We are in multiple different magazines talking about numerous things that we've hacked. From fridges to my friend Kayla here, who actually started it all, to Wi-Fi kettles, to pretty much anything. But Mikko Hyppinen put it really, really well when he said, back in 2016, he said, every company is a software company. And it's really true when you think about it. You think about automotive industry. You make cars. That's hardware, right? You think of Tesla, they make cars. They're not. They're a software firm. All of those vehicles require software. If you deliver parcels, maybe the Royal Mail, you make software so you can efficiently deliver your parcels. You make software so you can understand how your systems work. If you're in shipping, for example, you have software so that you can load your ship effectively. You have so that it doesn't topple over in the middle of the seas. You use software so you can map where you're going. Captains do not know how to use paper maps anymore. They use electronic chart and display information systems. But with software, vulnerabilities follow, right? And so that's where our job comes in. Our job as security researchers, pen testers, ethical hackers, whatever you want to call them, is to look for vulnerabilities in products. We look for vulnerabilities in systems used to prevent attackers exploiting those that could potentially lead to compromise. And some of that research can be really good. Take, for example, our research into dating apps. This is mobile dating apps. What we found through looking into these devices is that a lot of them are leaking pinpoint information about your location to advertisers. In this particular case, this is Grindr telling their Braze advertiser where you are to millimeter location detail. Why does an advertiser need to know that? I don't know. But it got worse when we started looking at the ability to triangulate. So a lot of these apps have the ability to be able to allow you to find out who is nearby so you can have a hookup. And through triangulation with multiple points, you can actually locate individual users. really, really bad. Especially if you think if this is an LGBT type app, then you're potentially putting people in physical harm. And so what we did through our research is we worked with the organizations and we helped them define this kind of approach, a snap-to-grid approach, whereby when you locate someone who is within range of you, you're not actually locating the individual, you're locating the grid that the individual belongs to. And that makes a little bit of anonymity. If there's enough people in that grid, then you are likely to be likely to be safer. It's not brilliant, but it's better than it was. And of course, Wired worked with Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek famously to hack the Jeep, or should we say they hacked it and told Wired. And that was fascinating because that's led a step change in automotive security. Because of their research, other companies were like, we can't do that. We don't want to be like that. We need to be better. And that's led to lives being saved, quite frankly. Lives have been saved as a result of that research. But these are really positive situations where research has worked. It doesn't always work that way, and I wanted to highlight some of the more amusing ones where it didn't quite work. And this one here, this watch I've got here, is the amusingly named Kids Watcher app. I mean, it's just an awful name for a child's tracking watch. It's like, well, it's awful, to say the least. And the thing is, these use an API, and the API is vulnerable. That API, we can locate children in real time. I'm going to show you the app that we created. So this is it. And what you can see we've got their name, we've got their sex. We can also find their height and their weight. Really useful if you want to kidnap children because, as they say, you don't try to kidnap fat people, right? So it's much easier if you have someone lighter. And so with this one, what we can do is we can actually zoom in and we can see real children. I should caveat, I'm not a psychopath, so I'm not actually showing you real children. This is fake data, but it uses the same concept. And what we can do if we zoom in on it, we can see the children actually moving. We actually get an update every 5 minutes of where the child is located. We've sped it up for the purposes of this, but you can track where the child goes, where they've been, where they frequent during the day. Really, really bad. What's scary about this is we contacted the vendor and they ignored us. Even when the BBC contacted the vendor, they ignored them. This has not been fixed. Children are still at risk as a result of this vulnerability, which is frustrating. We've created a bingo card for how vendors will respond to us when we contact them with a security risk. Commonly, radio silence. The majority of vendors just ignore us. But often people will turn around and try and threaten us with legal action, because that really works quite well, doesn't it, right? Or they'll say, it's not our problem. It's an old piece of software. It's out of support. Really, really common vulnerabilities, vulnerability responses. One of the manufacturers that we have looked at recently is this brand, ThinkRace. Now, ThinkRace, you will never have heard of them, I would imagine, but they are in so many different devices. They create an API that tracking devices use. Interestingly, they advertise that they provided trackers to vulnerable adults at the Special World Olympics, which is quite scary when you kind of think that the vulnerabilities they've got allow you to track those individuals without any authentication. We've tried to approach them for the last 3 years. They've ignored us. They have no interest in speaking to us. We've talked about privacy issues, the location side of it. But now we're talking about how we can really exploit it for a much more significant attack. You can actually find all of their APIs with 2 Google Docs, either version 2 or version 3 Open API. We'll find the actual APIs that are used by all of these devices. There's around about 370 different device types. It's not just watches, it's also vehicle trackers and all sorts of other trackers, pet trackers as well. So you can find them really easily. They have 0 security. It's like they hadn't realized that we can use HTTPS now. Nothing uses HTTPS. The default password, 123456. On all of their devices, the default password is 123456. And most of the time, end users don't even know there's a web service, so they don't change it because they don't know that they can get to it. To find devices is dead simple. This is how you can find them. So this is just one of the APIs. They include a test harness on the API, publicly available on the internet, which is really nice of them. So you just type in parameters to find them. It's really well documented as well. So in this particular case, we found a device here. This is over in China. It shows the longitude and latitude of the actual device. It shows the device name, the phone number of the device, because of course these devices use SIM cards, right? And then it's also got things like the email address of the user and passwords that they've used, all available without any authentication. As I mentioned, they use SIM cards. This is very much like the SIM card in your phone. Often you'll find that some providers might use an eSIM, but the very vast majority of them will use a standard SIM card that you have in your mobile phone. So with that SIM card, what else can you do? Well, like your phone, these devices can also make phone calls. They can also make text messages. So could we actually use it to manipulate voting? I'm thinking voting on talent shows here. Could we use it to finally get the UK to win Eurovision? Sadly, yes and no. Yes, we absolutely can win the televote, but sadly with Eurovision, they have a thing called the jury vote, and that means that we can't win that. So yeah, sadly, the UK still can't win, unfortunately. But we can win X Factor, right? And who wouldn't want to win X Factor? But the thing is, this is kind of the sort of the more amusing, less risky side of this vulnerability. It gets more scary when you think about denial of service. Because I wouldn't mind betting that a lot of you have got call centers in your organization, right? And you have a phone number that your customers will ring up and they'll be able to get through to them, through to your call centers. How many phone lines have you got? These devices, there's around about 25 million of them. Can you manage 25 million phone calls at exactly the same time? No. So I can deny service to your call centers in one hit. But let's be honest, it's your call center. Who cares? It's not really the end of the world, right? Say you're a washing machine manufacturer, it really doesn't matter unless you're Whirlpool. But it really doesn't matter. It's not going to cause an impact. But what if you're the emergency services? How many phone lines do you think 999 have got? Or 112? Or 911? Not that many. So potentially you could knock out the emergency services line. So people couldn't actually ring in to report an emergency. But that's kind of just ringing in to report the emergency. What about stopping the response itself? So another manufacturer he looked at, and this is in looking at vehicle trackers as opposed to pure vehicle trackers as opposed to ThinkRace. This brand, SmartTrack, created a product which allows you to track your vehicle, a bit like the market leader Tracker. We also found vulnerabilities in their product, but that's a different story. But interesting with this one, there was a web call, this web call here, which was completely unauthenticated, that an attacker could use. In fact, it was used by the call centers to immobilize your vehicle when it was stolen, but an attacker could equally use it to disable all of their vehicles. They had 20,000 vehicles under their control, so you could just stop all vehicles working. Now, just to be clear, I don't believe the emergency services use SmartTrack, and this vulnerability has been fixed as well. They were really, really effective, really responded effectively to our notifying them of the issue. And it's a really positive story, actually, to how vulnerability research can work, but it certainly shouldn't really be possible in software. So you think of an attack scenario. A terrorist decides they want to target a part of London, for example. Well, they knock out 999 so no one can report the issue, then carry out the issue and immobilize all of the vehicles, and then the police can't respond to it either. That's not so good. So obviously there's a fine line with responsible disclosure. When we disclose, there is a fine line to how we can do it. We have to be very mindful that we're not going to give away too much information. An example where disclosure maybe didn't go that effectively is with WannaCry. Of course, we remember with WannaCry, it was occurred as a result of a vulnerability that the NSA discovered or bought or whatever, and then which was subsequently leaked online. Attackers realized that they could use that as a wormable attack, and then created WannaCry and took out the NHS. So there is a real risk to publishing our findings. Attackers can take those and turn it into an attack prior to anyone being able to fix them, as in the case of the NHS. But I do think there is real positive to it. We do need to publish these because there is a lot of benefit to publishing. Not least, it forces organizations to actually respond. And I mean the organization who manufactures the product. People respond better if they're under pressure that they're going to get publicly disclosed. It's known. We can see that. So how do we go about fixing this? How do we make this a better world to be in? Well, I think, for me, I'd like to see companies embracing the security research community a lot better. And I don't mean using things like bug bounties. Bug bounties are great, but the problem with bug bounties is they are very limited. Bug bounties are typically going to cover off a certain set of criteria, and of course the people looking for vulnerabilities are going to look for the ones which pay them more money. And those are usually remote code execution vulnerabilities, not data loss. And of course data loss is what matters to us as individuals, right? Much more than their servers getting compromised. So I'd like to see some simple things that companies can do. Most simply, have a security email address. It's such an obvious thing, but so many companies we contact do not have that. The amount of times I get emails bounced back to me because they haven't got a security @ Why not? It doesn't cost you any money, for goodness sake. Just set it up. I'd also like to see the ability for customers to return products that are found to be vulnerable. So you can return it to store. I'd also like to see people being able to have products removed from store when they are actually found to be vulnerable until they are fixed, in the same way your sofa is, for example. But the challenge is that's not going to happen unless you're a top-tier firm voluntarily. That will need to be something that is done through regulation. And I think regulation can really help here. And the Department for Culture, Media and Sport have introduced a voluntary code of conduct for IoT, which is brilliant, and they have committed to making that law. I saw an advert online the other day that someone's actually getting a role to implement this, which is great. We're also seeing in Europe, ENISA have introduced some code of conducts which we were involved in creating. Very complex, but really, really very good. Both of those are backed by GDPR. And the great thing about GDPR is that it's forced companies to make changes. We need to do the same with demands on security to improve security. One bill that is mandatory is Senate Bill 327. Senate Bill 327 suggests that organizations need to make reasonable security features. Really interestingly, it cites our research, my friend Kayla that I brought along with me today. And so I thought what I'd do is I'd ask Kayla to see what her thoughts are on this legislation which mentions her. So what do you reckon, Kayla?
Are you serious? There is now a law that actually mentions me. I am angry, I am livid, and I'm fine.
Okay, we'll stop there, thank you, Kayla. So I asked at the start of the presentation, can we ever be unhackable? And I think the answer to that is sadly not. We can never be unhackable, and I think that's an unachievable thing to expect. But we've got the tools, and we've got the techniques, and we've got the ability to make it a darn sight harder. Why don't we just use that? Thank you, and that's me.